So it sounds like obviously there was a fair amount of people who were involved in this to do the, collect petitions, the organizing, the meetings, the education work, and so forth. Can you talk a little bit about, Mark? And you don't have to necessarily name names, but if you can remember names, feel free to share them. But maybe talk about, the kinds of people who were involved in this campaign and what it was like to, if you have any kind of recollection or stories in terms of doing this kind of work with them, in terms of getting people motivated and then going out and doing the kind of work you needed to make the campaign happen.
Well, yeah, the names are coming to me right now, and I'll hopefully not leave some out, and I'm sure I will, and some of them I might not even want to have their names mentioned. But one of the key components was we were afraid we weren't going to get enough signatures to get on the campaign, on the petition. First of all, then we were even more afraid that if we got on and then lost the vote, that would be a real setback. So as much as getting the petition signed, we were building a groundswell of making sure that we had an election campaign going, if you will, of making sure we had enough workers, and we were out leafleting neighborhoods, and we ran it like you were running for a statewide office, and we're certain that we were going, if we got it on the ballot, we would win the ballot. And we did. Michigan won it handily. I think in that very conservative era, I think we had over 55% statewide. The core was again more the people that were in the 70s doing the anti-nuke work, the education, the core people, Betty Ford. And the whole cadre around working on peace education in the schools. Sue Hartman, I remember very well, ran the whole. She was the chair of the task force or committee that organized getting the petitions, and she had over 100 to 200 people that came to her meetings alone on a weekly basis, and organized getting them ready and making sure that they were legal documents signed correctly and representing different counties, because you had to get each signature based on which county. And we not only did Kent County, but we went to places where there were people from almost every county in the state we would get signatures from. Earl Hoyer was a major leader in this, and I can remember a picture of the banner that we took to the United Nations where Earl's daughter and my daughter were holding the banner up from Grand Rapids, Michigan, IGE, with the number of signatures that we got statewide. There was literally hundreds of people that were on the local committee. We must have had on good Saturdays a couple hundred people out getting petitions, so I'm not even going to come close to remembering all the names, but Virginia Chambers, the whole committee of the Institute for Global Education, the people that were leaders in the Middle East were supportive of it, the Central American Task Force people. It was truly an anti-war, anti-imperialist cross-fertilization, local global strategy that didn't compete with my issues more important than your issue. Because the same people that worked on the freeze were instrumental in helping press for gains on apartheid or on other issues that were germane to our focus as well. But there was a lot more work going on than I was privy to even at the time. It was a groundswell. We had people that I didn't even know were interested showing up at rallies and meetings. And we would do fundraisers. We'd have, I think we even did some fundraisers at the White Rabbit we did a Rock Against Racism thing, but we also did raising money for the Nuclear Freeze campaign through concerts like that.
Okay. So, I mean, it's, I kind of, came to Grand Rapids sort of at the tail end of that organizing around the free stuff. But I mean, obviously, just despite all the efforts, despite all the petitions, signatures, and going to the UN and so forth, I mean, disarmament didn't happen. I mean, the U.S. Kept building and deploying more and more weapons. But in many ways, there were also lots of other sort of victories that kind of came out of that just because of the organizing itself. I mean, you've already sort of touched on some, but just in terms of what the Freeze movement kind of gave birth to in terms of other kinds of organizing, particularly around disarmament stuff or U.S. militarism, U.S. imperialism. I mean, what do you think the relationship is between people who were involved in the Freeze movement and then people who kept being involved in sort of larger anti-war organizing after the Freeze campaign sort of fizzled?
Going to New York and for the march, where there were 1 million people in the streets, when we gave our petitions to the United Nations, and then going to a major musical concert in the park there, we marched along the streets of New York City with the Lincoln Brigade, and these were guys that volunteered to go fight against fascism in the 1930s, and I was walking with history. And Chester Graham was on our committee, and Chester was a CO and worked with the Red Cross in World War I as a conscientious objector. And Peter and Helen Wink were active, and they had been. Peter was a refugee during World War II, and when he came here as an immigrant, he thought that all of the United States were Quakers because those were who kept him alive as a little kid through feeding of the little children in Germany, and they won the Nobel Peace Prize. So I had a long view look through my mentors, through Peter and Helen Wink and Chester Graham, and marching with the Lincoln Brigade, that this isn't. Einstein's relativity of time, I think, is right on. What we think is a disaster ends up becoming a victory, and we need to have a long-term view of it. As it relates to the Lincoln Brigade, it's just now been recent that Spain has agreed that Franco was a fascist, and he was a terrible leader, and that couldn't have happened in the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s. It had to wait until after 2013 for the Spanish government to admit that Franco was a fascist. So the Soviet Union collapsed. I did my PhD on the children of Chernobyl in Belarus and went where Gromyko grew up, and I saw a bust of him in a park in Minsk. And he was one of the Russians that we lobbied against the nuclear freeze campaign. So history is telling me that the arms race collapsed the Soviet Union, and the Vietnam War collapsed the gold standard through Nixon, and I think our economy is screaming. We had the collapse of 2008, and I think the groundswell will come again, and the political will of the people versus the military machine that Eisenhower warned us about is a continuing process. I wish my granddaughter doesn't have to get out and march, but I think I'm starting to feel like not quite a Chester Graham, but now I'm a historian, where before I was a young activist.
So, go ahead, Mark.
One of the slogans that we used with the Institute for Global Education was the French environmentalist, and I'm not going to remember his name, but his motto was think globally but act locally. And the Freeze movement personified that, where we made links between what the arms race was costing us locally and world hunger, while at the same time we were organizing the Freeze. We had the largest hunger walk in the country, and I was the treasurer of that. And a lot of the people that walked in the hunger walks were also on the Freeze movement. And now I'm working with combat vets and critiquing the war in Vietnam and the cost that had in life and limb and resources and money. And going with Vietnam vets back to Vietnam in 2010, saying prayers and burning incense in battle zones, and not fighting that old war again, but having them articulate why we should never had fought that war. And that was a part of what was going on at the same time as the Freeze movement. So clinically and politically and existentially, I got two choices. It deals with me or I deal with it. I can either be a part of the solution or I can stay stuck in the muck and the mire the way the system wants us to be and wants me to be, and allow the system to continue to chew up the disenfranchised and the poor. And we got two choices. We either grab a hold of the issues that are upon us today and move the boulder further along, or we get more entrapped in the idiocy of what the system's trying to get us addicted to. The good news is we didn't have the internet back then. The good news is you got the internet now. Whatever resources we're going to use, we're going to have to use it to be a part of the solution rather than part of the problem.